listeners. Because I get a lot of curious questions from people about how I'm doing and what I'm working on at the moment, I decided to make a 3-part podcast in which I explain all about it. This is the first one. Number 2 and 3 will follow soon, so keep an eye on social media or subscribe to my channel. I've been waiting in Iñapari for 6 weeks for this moment of happiness, crossing the bridge between Peru and Brazil. I left Peru legally, which is not an obvious thing in times of closed borders. In search of a better life during this quarantine, thousands of people crossed the river between Peru and Brazil illegally. Happiness flows through my whole body, so I decide to step out on the bridge and make an enthusiastic dance of joy. Yes, just keep going and you will get there. Unfortunately, the joy did not last for long. At the Brazilian border, I courageously step up to the federal police, who, I think, will give me a stamp without any problems, so I can reach the nearest village just before dark. But no luck. Can you please wait a moment? Yes, I reply with a happy face. Waiting 10 minutes longer is nothing compared to the 6 weeks I waited in the border village of Iñapari. I still feel the joy running through my body. The window of the office slides open again. Have you received permission to enter Brazil? Yes, I say, and full of confidence I show him the email that the Dutch embassy in Brazil sent me a few days ago. It says that the borders are open, so I shouldn't get any difficulties. The email also contains an official letter as an attachment, in which the Dutch ambassador kindly requests to give all Dutch citizens permission to cross the border. According to the Dutch ambassador, that should be sufficient. The federal police officer hardly looked at the letter. The Brazilian border is closed, and if you want to cross, your embassy has to request permission for you personally to Foreign Affairs. They will then contact us, and perhaps then you may cross the border. So does this mean that everyone in Peru was poorly informed about the Brazilian border, even though it is less than 1 kilometer away from the Peruvian border? Seems unlikely to me. But it's a fact that everyone has given me the wrong information. And now I ask the police, who despite the bad news he gave me, is quite friendly. You can enter the village of Assis until you have news from your embassy. Okay, thank you. So hopefully I see you tomorrow or the day after. Assis is literally no man's land, because you can enter without a stamp in your passport. A lucky coincidence. It's a bit of a disappointment, but the news doesn't seem so bad, since the Dutch embassy had to do the same process for me to get out of Peru. That took 6 weeks though, but I think that when the Dutch embassy hears about my current situation, they will probably take immediate action. After all, they were the ones that made the mistake to misinform me about the so-called open borders. And if I've learned one thing during the corona time, it is to be patient. Waiting a few days longer to cross the border doesn't matter that much to me anymore. In the village I enter a pharmacy to buy a SIM card. Then I realize that I'm in Brazil now, so I have to withdraw reais first. So instead of a SIM card, I asked for the bank. A girl in the shop offers to take me there, because she happens to be on her way to the bank as well. I point to my van and say, "Jump in so we can drive there together." Exactly at that moment, a tropical rain shower hits us. Great. Once in the bank, I can't withdraw money because the bank doesn't recognize international cards, which is clear from the fact that I have to type a 6-digit code. On top of that, This is the only bank in the village, and the nearest international bank is 300 kilometers away, which I can't go without a stamp in my passport. I tell the girl that I still have enough food in my van, but that I really need internet to contact my embassy. I'll take you to a family that is always very helpful to foreigners, who probably don't mind sharing their Wi-Fi with you. Once I arrive, a somewhat reserved woman opens the door, and, with my poor Portuguese, I cannot understand exactly what she is saying, but it doesn't sound as if she is really happy with my arrival. I don't really have to deal with her because I parked the van in the little square in front of her house. She says her sister will be back from work later today and will give me the Wi-Fi password. The girl points to the fallen mangoes underneath the 2 huge mango trees on the square. The lawn is full of them. We both choose the good ones, and with 5 mangoes each we say goodbye. I thank her very much and start eating my long-awaited mangoes. I can't restrain myself and immediately eat 3 in a row. In Inhapari I cycled 12 kilometers every day for a month from the countryside to the village to do some translation work at the major's office. Every day I looked up into each mango tree, by now knowing exactly where they were, to see whether they were ripe yet. Unfortunately, until the last day, they remained green, and I left Inhapari without obtaining a single ripe mango. So, the 2 mango tree neighbors feel like a warm welcome to my new place. My friends often say that I'm easily prejudiced, and we have been making jokes about this for years. Unfortunately, I cannot deny it, as now evidenced by the fact that the first thing I think of when the nice girl who brought me to my parking spot tells me that she is a Jehovah's Witness, I notice that I'm immediately disappointed. She seemed so nice by helping me, but that must be only because she wants to convert me afterwards. I hold that suspicion because in the past I attended a sort of Bible school where they literally discussed a step-by-step plan on how to convert someone. Step 1 was helping people. Well, that is exactly what she had done. In the evening, she comes by with her Jehovah's friend. In the meantime, the neighbor gave me her Wi-Fi password. She seemed a bit insignificant to me. With the Wi-Fi now installed on my laptop and phone, I immediately start writing an email to the Dutch embassy in Brazil. I press send and hope to receive an answer soon, so I can still cross the border. The reply arrives, but it's not what I expected it to be. The first mail I receive from them ends with, "We hope that we have provided you with sufficient information." After emailing back and forth a few more times, the last sentence is again, "We hope that we have provided you with sufficient information." I'm not getting anywhere. Well, here I am, in Nomansland. When I asked the Dutch embassy in Peru about possibilities to return, that turns out to be impossible as well. This embassy has supported you within the possibilities and capacities available, and we hope you understand that no further interference by the embassy is possible. We hope that you will soon find a solution to your situation. Kind regards. I'm stuck between 2 borders, stuck in a small border village called Assis. The first weeks I spent under the burning sun in my van, with a USB mini fan and the windows and doors wide open, surviving on mangoes. Occasionally, during the first few weeks, the Jehovah's drop by with fruits and vegetables, trying their best to avoid plastic. I noticed they quickly understood my mission. We sit down in front of my camper and it feels like I am at a campsite. The neighbor I told you about is also becoming more friendly and turns out to be a very nice woman. The suspicion that I felt in the beginning ebbs away among the people in the street, and more people come and chat with me. This street, with all its characters, I could write a book about it if I had the talent. As the suspicion of the people in the street ebbs away, so does my prejudice against the Jehovah's Girls. Even though they have very radical ideas, it turns out that we think the same about the really important questions in life. A few weeks after I met them, the girls leave to the other side of Brazil to continue their mission there, without ever having tried to convert me in any way. So I was able to say goodbye to that prejudice as well. This was part 1 of my 3-part podcast about my adventures here in Nomansland between the borders of Peru and Brazil. Thanks for listening. Dear listeners, in part 1 of this 3-part podcast, I told you about how I ended up here in this small village of Assis, which, by the way, despite a population of less than 7,500, they still call a city. In this part, I continue to tell you about my adventures here in Nomansland between the borders of Peru and Brazil. Since I started living without plastic, I've been adapting more and more things in my life to minimize my impact on this planet. On average, the biggest impact a person has on this planet is buying stuff. Yes, stuff, in the broadest sense of the word. Although I already started buying less stuff, since I seriously started avoiding plastics, after I read the book The Hidden Impact, Think Big, Act Now, by Babette Porcelein, it was another reason to try and only buy as little new stuff as possible. I think that everyone can do this, but I also realize that in my current situation, it's easier. In other situations, it might be harder for others, or even for me. But anyway, I'm starting to realize that through this approach, some things become so much more valuable. For example, since I arrived here in the stifling hot jungle, where mosquitoes spread dengue fever, I feel the need for long but airy trousers. My shorts and long thick jeans are not very useful here. Since I don't want to just buy new clothes, I have to be patient. After a few weeks of patience and awkward clothing combinations, the Jehovah Girls, mentioned before in part 1, who'd never heard me express my trousers dilemma, offer clothes from half their wardrobe because they cannot take it all with them on the plane. And there I found 2 pairs of trousers of the kind I've been longing for in the past few weeks. I don't want this podcast to be too long, but I could have given a few more similar examples. What I want to say is that even though your patience is put to test, you become a more grateful person. Because when you don't get things the easy way, which is the norm nowadays, you appreciate those things much more. The days pass in Nomansland. I wash my clothes in the rain, which pours down every few days, and I bury my organic waste in the bushes. Curiosity grows among the neighbors, and when first they used to secretly observe me from their veranda, they now cautiously come over for a talk. After a while, the neighbors across the road offer me access to their toilet and shower. They let me refill my water at their place and wash my clothes by hand in their sink. This family has 2 daughters, who share the care of their 98-year-old father. One of those daughters is Marilene, who also has her husband and son of 34 living in the same house. Her father sings songs from his armchair all day long, or rather, he repeats mainly one song that he learned during the war. He repeats it so often that I sometimes find myself humming along with it softly. I admire the patience with which his daughters look after him. I get to know the rest of the neighbors better, and they get to know me better as well. I found out that about half the street is related to the neighbors in front of me. One brother of the sisters lives next to them. He is, without a doubt, this typical man in the street who watches the world go by. He keeps an eye on everything, every day. Occasionally he comes by for a chat, or actually to take a look into my life. He finds it very interesting to see how I live. With everything I do differently than he would expect, he says, "Que genia!" Another neighbor, also a brother of Marileni, often comes to give me a piece of fruit from their chakra, a piece of land they have. And so, I have already tasted a lot of delicious and for me unknown fruits. Marileni also likes to gift food, and regularly brings me a plate with beans and rice, because that is what they eat here every day. A very diverse cuisine, as you see. Marileni noticed that I'm melting in my van, in the burning sun all day, and she has a chat with the neighbor. She asked him if I could park my van in his carport, which is almost empty anyway. The neighbor agrees and Marileni comes to tell me the news. The funny thing is that I hadn't even thought of that brilliant idea, while the carport is right in front of my van. I thank the neighbor friendly and park the van, which fits exactly under the roof of the carport. Eventually, I discover that this is the only carport in the whole village high enough for my van. What a difference! During the tropical rain, I can now leave my door open, and thanks to the roof of the carport, I no longer melt in my van. Now this neighbor also starts giving me fruit from his chakra. What a generosity! Christmas, New Year's Eve and my birthday are approaching. I increasingly start to realize that I will probably celebrate it all here, because I don't see the borders opening anytime soon. The federal police, whom I visit every now and then to ask for information, still says that I really need the help of my embassy to get that stamp. I spent Christmas Eve as well as New Year's Eve with the neighbors. On Christmas Eve, out of the blue, I'm asked to sing a song on my ukulele in the church. After the ceremony, a girl with a head full of beautiful curls comes running straight up to me and against all corona rules gives me a big hug and says "Muito obrigada," which means thank you very much. I had not been aware of this until that moment, but through this hug I realized how much I miss physical contact. South America, with his normally so cuddly people, has changed into a culture where the elbow greeting has become normal, and you never receive a hug anymore. I heard that in the Netherlands this is called skin hunger. I don't know who invented that strange word, but it became clear to me that I'm suffering from it, when I realized how nice it was to receive a warm hug from someone again. With the somewhat dull Christmas days behind me, I have no expectations about New Year's Eve. I'm quietly waiting to see what will happen. During the day, I bake a bread and prepare a salad because I was told that we would be eating together. At 9:30, when nobody comes by to announce dinner, I feel a bit sorry for myself. Alone in my van on a deserted street, as if everyone has left the village. Fortunately, a friend of mine from the Netherlands sent me a message asking me how my evening goes. After I tell her that I'm by myself, staring at the walls of my van, she gives me the tip to go and watch the Dutch New Year's Eve cabaret show that is held every year to get in the mood. Despite the bad jokes, it cheered me up a bit. Not much later, my neighbor shouts from over the wall, "Come, Uki, let's have dinner." Uki is the name most people in South America use, because it's easier for them to pronounce than Jorien. And because they know me playing my ukulele when I sing. At 10 o'clock we finally have our New Year's Eve dinner. When we have to wait another hour or so until midnight, I suggest we play a game that I made myself recently. It's a game of personal questions to get to know each other a little bit better. Most of my neighbors are excited with this suggestion, and we start. The hours passes like a flash, and before we know, it's 12 o'clock. We wish each other a happy new year and continue playing, because everyone seems to find it a very enjoyable activity. How do you remember your childhood? Happens to be one of the questions. A friend of the family, who's also celebrating New Year's Eve with us, tells us that he has been working ever since he can remember. As a child, he already had to help out. He never went to school and can't remember anything else but working. I find it touching to hear how the answers to this question differ so much between all of us, and I realize how important it is to share life stories and how it makes you respect each other so much more. I also had this moment during my psychology studies. I realize once again how much easier it is to understand and respect someone when you know their story. The next question is asked: when do you feel completely in your element? I answer: when I give a presentation of my project in front of a group of children or adults. I assume my answer to that question got Marileni to take action, because from the next day onwards she's doing everything she can to ensure that I can give presentations with my project in Assis. The church, the supermarket, and the headmistress of a closed school are excited about the idea. I also have a meeting with the municipality of this village one day later. I walk into the supermarket to give a presentation to the staff. The supermarket owner leads me to the room where my presentation will take place. On the way there, she opens a refrigerator and takes out a plastic bottle. "Here," she says. "It's so hot, you'll need it." I say, "No thanks," but she doesn't seem to hear that and puts the bottle on the table where I'm going to give my presentation. "Unfortunately, she can't be at the presentation herself," she says. During the presentation, I mention the irony of the plastic bottle their boss gave me. Later, I heard that the boss was told by her staff that it was really not acceptable to offer me that bottle, knowing that I had come to talk about plastic pollution. The next day she comes to me in shame to apologize. She asks me if I can make some suggestions to reduce plastic in her supermarket. I propose a plan to her with different campaign ideas. One of them is to give presentations to visitors at the entrance of the supermarket. I also create a story to record and play through the intercom at the supermarket. She agrees and we start with the presentations, which I give at the entrance of the supermarket for 3 days in a row. One evening, 3 visitors come to listen to my presentation. They invite me to have dinner with them the next day. One of them, a bit of a nerd, picks me up. He is in Assis for a month, but he lives in Sao Paulo, he tells me. I ask him what he does in daily life. The answer to my question surprised me. "I'm training to be a priest." A priest! When 5 minutes later we arrive at the house where he is staying this month, it is obvious. It is full of biblical paintings, books, and ornaments. And there are another 3 older priests who, as the evening passes, turn out to be very good at card games. We have a nice evening together. Oh, and for those of you who are wondering whether I found a solution for withdrawing money, the supermarket owner is sweet to allow me as the only visitor, to withdraw money with a special device. One problem less. Since I ended up here in Assis, I realized that I'm dealing with a special mix of people. The Jehovah's Witnesses I told you about in part 1, the priests, the strict Catholic neighbors, who you don't recognize as soon as they enter the church, and my strict evangelical neighbors on the other side, who I look at a bit differently, now that I found out that they are Bolsonaro supporters. And I could easily continue this list. Now, it will not surprise you that I make an imaginary jump in the air when I receive an Instagram message from a Brazilian-Mexican couple who tell me that they are traveling together through South America on bicycles with their cat. They tell me that they are stranded in Assis, just like me. I find the people in this village very sweet and interesting, but to know that there are 2 more peers in this village stranded on their bikes and with a cat makes me very happy and curious. They ask if I'd like to meet up, and tomorrow happens to be my birthday, so I invite them straight away, and from that moment on, we are buddies. I'm so happy to have found 2 friends in this village, with whom I share many of the same interests and beliefs. It feels like a gift from the universe. That afternoon I decide to go to Peru, together with my 3 priest friends. How, you might wonder? Well, that's easy because at the end of my street is a river, where boats are waiting to take people illegally to Peru. And since I'm with 3 priests, this seems safe to me. In Assis, where I'm now, I can hardly buy anything without plastic, and in Iñapari in Peru, I can. You have to do something, in this case an illegal boat trip, to get your zero-waste groceries. The 5-minute boat trip feels like an adventure after being stuck in a small village for so long. Once we arrive on the other side, I see that a police officer is standing right next to the place where we will land. We don't say anything to each other, but there is no doubt we are all thinking the same. Let's hope for the best. The police officer is smoking his cigarette. I have to walk past him, and I try to do so in a way that is as unsuspicious as possible, as far as I can, as a clumsy Dutchie between the over 2 head smaller Peruvians. He is quiet. Everything appears to be fine, but we don't understand it. A quiet, relaxed police officer witnessing an obviously illegal action, while a few kilometers further on, the same police officers are standing on the bridge stopping people from entering Peru. A remarkable situation. The groceries I do are for my birthday tomorrow. 0 waste and free of animal products. I want to take the opportunity to show people that you can also eat vegetarian. Here they always say that I only eat salad. That's what they call all the food that doesn't contain meat. On my birthday, my homemade pumpkin quiche is therefore also called a salad. But fortunately, they do like it. By now I try not to raise any expectations around celebrations anymore, so it can always turn out better than expected. This helps, because I have a great birthday. The day before my birthday, it rained a lot, so my 2 Argentinian friends arrived for my birthday ankle deep covered with mud to visit me. They had crossed the border from Peru with the illegal boat, which due to the rain didn't go as smoothly as mine the day before. But anyway, they have arrived. We catch up with each other. They tell me they are going back to the valley, because their plan to drive back over land through Brazil to Argentina is not possible with all those closed borders. And on top of that, their van is growing mold from all sides in this humid weather. Later that day, Samira, the girl who had approached me on Instagram, the neighbors and the priests also visit me, and even the owner of the supermarket drops by to bring me a cake. This time, free of plastic packaging. My neighbor also brings me a beautiful cake and sets up chairs and tables. There are lovely speeches, and after a long time I sing opera for the guests. The questions cards, that by now have become popular, are asked for again. We end the day with interesting conversations. I slowly come to understand why so many people have lied to me about the so-called open borders. The difference between entering a country legally or illegally doesn't seem that big to the majority of people here. In fact, I always get an incredulous look thrown at me when I explain to people that I don't manage to get into the country. When I then explain that I'm legally not managing to get into the country, I almost always get a reaction that goes like, "Ah, yeah, well, then it becomes difficult." For many of the people here, it doesn't seem to matter whether you get a stamp in your passport or not. And that is the reason why many people think that the border is open, just because there is no one there to check. However, I still consider it quite important to enter the country legally. And for this, the most important thing is to be patient. This was part 2 of the 3-part podcast about my adventures here in Nomansland between the borders of Peru and Brazil. Part 3 will also appear here soon. And if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, then listen to it soon on your favorite podcast channel. Pictures that go with this podcast can be found on my website, ecobusamerica.com. You can also read my earlier written newsletters there. Thanks for listening. Dear listeners, this is the last part 3 of the podcast series about my experiences here in Nomansland between the borders of Peru and Brazil. I have run out of gas in my van. Difficult, because it is an Argentine gas bottle that I can usually refill in some places. In this small village, that is unfortunately not possible. But my neighbor has already found an old cooker at her friend's place within a few days. I can borrow a refill bottle from my other neighbors, so all I have to do is buy in gas. I hear you thinking, well, that's nice and environmental friendly, cooking with gas. I know, it's not. These are still points that I'm not very proud of. I think the most important thing is to try and do what you can to live a more environmental friendly life. And this is one of the things I haven't found a good alternative for here, in this place, until now. The same goes for the van, which unfortunately is not yet environmentally friendly. And as many of you will know, that is of course my big dream. Still, all that waiting has unexpectedly turned it into a quite eco-friendly van for this year. My van is parked underneath the carport, as I told you in my previous podcast. The arrival of the cooker means that the space behind my van, which got cozier and cozier over the last few weeks, has now officially been transformed into a real living kitchen. It all starts with a hammock that I get from the neighbors. And thanks to my hobby of taking stuff from the streets and turning it into furniture, this hobby also comes in handy in this place. I make the table, version number 1, from an old door and 2 tree trunks. Until one day when I see a beautiful long table standing at the rubbish dump of the supermarket, which is just a stone's throw from where I now live. Together with Samira and Israel, we bring my door-made table to their house. And, let me remind you, Samira and Israel traveled through South America on their bicycles before they got stuck here. So they don't have much more than a tent, a hammock, some clothes and a laptop. You can imagine how empty their rented house, or rather called room, looks like, because here they have never heard of renting a furnished house. Israel sleeps in his tent that he has set up in their rented room, and Samira in her hammock. You can imagine how happy they are now that they can finally eat and work at a, as far as you can call it, real table. The long table dumped by the supermarket goes to my house. Both Samira, Israel and me are very happy with our new purchase. For the presentations I have planned in this village, I think it's a good idea to show the people a video about where the waste that is thrown in the trash actually ends up. I decide to approach the rubbish men and ask them if I can go along for a ride. Yes, fine, they say, and so I drive with them for 3 afternoons. It is impressive to see how hard this work is for these men. Every day, for hours and hours, they run and throw all the rubbish bags that people put outside into the rubbish truck, under the burning sun. It feels almost uncomfortable to sit so comfortably, as far as you can call it comfortable, in the truck and watch these men run around sweating. When we arrive at the supermarket, boxes full of meat are given to the rubbish men. And I also notice that there are 3 huge bags with still edible vegetables and fruit, ready to be thrown into the rubbish truck. I notice in myself that my above described hobby of taking things from the street doesn't end with furniture, because I get a strong desire to ask if I can take some of that food, meant for the rubbish dump, home with me, and I decide to just ask them. Yes, they say, and I put some cucumbers, tomatoes, carrots and melons in my bag. My grocery shopping for the coming week is done. We get back into the rubbish truck. On to the dump that is less than 10 minutes away from the center. The vultures are already waiting for us. It is an impressive sight to see all that rubbish being dumped into the ground. What do you think about this? I ask the rubbish man, while they give me a tour around the dump. I think it's good, replies one of them. Why? Do I ask. First, it was much worse, he said. They didn't bury the rubbish, and the smell was unbearable. As I'm talking about rubbish, I'd like to tell you something about food waste. I'd like to list a few facts that might make you appreciate the story that follows a bit more. There it comes. Throwing away 1 hamburger has the same impact as taking a shower for 90 minutes. Eliminating food waste would save the atmosphere 4.4 million tons of CO2. That's as much as the emissions from 1/4 of all the cars driving around the world. 1/3 of the world's food is thrown away, while 1 in 9 people suffer from food shortage. Now that we know that bags with usable fruit and vegetables are occasionally left outside, Samira and I often take a bag home and pick out the usable fruit and vegetables to make delicious recipes. But most often I get fruit and vegetables from the vegetable shop around the corner. One day I see a whole box there of fruit and vegetables ready to be thrown away. I asked the saleswoman if I could take it with me. She says, with a somewhat strange expression on her face, "Sure." And since then, almost every time I buy something from her, she gives me some discarded fruit and vegetables that she would otherwise have thrown in the bin or fed to her chickens. "Don't you want to take this home yourself?" I ask her. But she says, "No, I don't eat fruit and vegetables." I found out that in this respect, in this village, she's unfortunately no exception. Almost everyone sees fruit and vegetables as an addition to their large piece of meat, or they simply never eat them. If I sometimes get a bit more from her, I make some extra food and share it with the neighbors, or with the saleswoman herself. They have to get used to it, because with their varied eating style of beans and rice with a good piece of meat, it's a bit strange for them to taste my homemade beetroot hummus. Everyone looks at me with uncomprehending eyes when I say that I have made hummus. They clearly don't know that phenomenon here. And that's the story of how I try to minimize food waste on a very small scale here in this village. And of course to keep my budget small too. If you want to read some useful tips on how to minimize food waste at home, I would suggest you check out the Too Good To Go UK Instagram account. They have some great tips on food storage. And if you want to know more about the phenomenon of dumpster diving, or in other words taking food that is thrown away by supermarkets, which I can imagine sounds a bit shabby to most of you, then I highly recommend listening to Rob Greenfield, who has inspiring stories about his minimalistic and activistic lifestyle, and he talks about his experiences with dumpster diving, among other things. One of the presentations I give here is in a small school that is closed due to Corona, of course. But because the headmistress thinks it would be a nice idea to organize some activities with the people from the neighborhood, she gives me permission to use a room in the school for these activities. On the first day, nobody shows up. We have not really advertised the event, so I'm not surprised. Samira, the neighbor, and I decide to drive around the neighborhood with my van and a huge sound box. Shortly before, we recorded a message that goes something like, come and see this, tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock. There will be a presentation by the Dutch Jorien Timmers, who will tell you everything about plastic pollution in the Maria Ferreira School. It blares through the streets, and we have the greatest fun. I also print out some posters, which I put up in various places in the neighborhood. It helps. The next day the classroom is full. Thanks to my neighbor, who occasionally translates my portuñol, or in other words my Spanish-Portuguese way of talking, for those present, my message arrives to the audience. I guess, in vain, that the next day I don't have to go through the neighborhood again to announce that a film afternoon has been planned for the afternoon. Only 3 people showed up. All 3 of them very touched by the documentary of the theme of plastics. Despite the small attendance, it makes me satisfied anyway. Since our earlier method was successful, of going through the streets with a speaker to announce an event, Samira and I decide to do this the next day on our bicycles. While cycling through the streets, I gain even more respect for the work of the rubbish collectors. After 2 hours under the burning sun, we are completely exhausted. The good news is, it helps. That evening the classroom is full again. This time with all children. It is the day of the workshop. Everyone has brought an old t-shirt, and those who don't have one get one from me, which I got donated from a second-hand clothes shop in the neighborhood. I explain how we are going to make a shopping bag out of this, which they can then take to the supermarket. The children start working enthusiastically, and at the end of the afternoon, they go home with their homemade bag. Recently, I got the key to the church annex that is located opposite my van. I can now use the shower and the toilet there. I'm very happy with this new privilege. After a conversation with the priest of the church, he said that I could also use this space to give presentations to small groups of children from the neighborhood. And so I start doing that right away. It makes me happy to be working on my project on a small scale. Assis is a village with few possibilities in the field of plastic-free products. However, there is still a very big first step to be taken here, namely in the mindset of the people. Take, for example, bringing your own bag when you go shopping. Twice already, during the questions round after my presentation, people confessed that they are afraid that other people will think that they have stolen something. When they put their groceries in their own bag after paying, or when buying a small amount of groceries and simply carry them out with their hands. I then asked them, what difference does it make to you what others think? You know that you have paid your way correctly, don't you? You and the cashier, who may even have given you a receipt, have the truth in hands, and no one can take that away from you. So what difference does it make if others think you have stolen? Is it not a good opportunity to explain why you did not take the plastic bag? The reaction I get from the audience says enough about the enormous value the people here attach to the opinion of their fellow villagers. This reverse way of thinking has never occurred to them. This is also the reason why I decided to focus on the first steps in this village, which are about habits and how to change them. One day Marileni comes to tell me that about 300 migrants have occupied the bridge between Peru and Brazil. You remember the bridge where I did the happy dance when I finally left Peru. She asked me if I can come with my camera to take pictures for the municipality. I decide to go with her, and I find a shabby situation with parents, children, pregnant women, etc. Weeks follow and the village fills up with migrants from all over Brazil, partly because the news goes international. At some points there are about 550 migrants walking around. They all want to cross the border. The local schools take care of them, and some of them live on the bridge for weeks. It is difficult for me to formulate an opinion on this, so I will leave that for now. There is no doubt that I am learning a lot from observing this situation critically and discussing it with Samira and Israel. Because of all these events, you might understand that despite the fact that I'm stuck in a mini village, it is never boring here. It's a special, but also very painful experience to see at close hand what migration looks like in practice. Every night I climb into my claustrophobic but very comfortable bed, realizing how grateful I am for my house on wheels, my Dutch passport, my family, and my friends, for the real important things in life. That is not to say that I always manage to be so grateful and positive about my situation. Do you also sometimes have the feeling that you are not doing enough for the world, while we are living at a tipping point now and therefore need to take action now? Sometimes this feeling comes to me, and those are the days that I get extra frustrated about my situation here. Still, I do know inside myself that I just have to do what is within my power, and thus have to think about the possibilities that are available here. After organizing several evenings with the children from the neighborhood and at the school, I receive a message saying that I cannot continue with this because of the stricter rules around COVID. That is one of those moments of frustration. I was doing so well, and again I could not continue. The municipality also disappointed me. After a very positive conversation with the mayor, I wrote a plan with ideas that the municipality, especially now that no groups can come together, can implement in the field of reducing plastic. Think of a poster campaign, for which I have already designed the posters, starting a recycle program, with the help of the project Precious Plastic, and thinking about a change in the regulations on plastic bags in the region. In other places in Brazil, the plastic bag has been banned for a long time already, or you have to buy it instead of receiving it. But despite the positive reactions to this plan, Corona and the migrants apparently keep them too busy, or an unknown reason keeps them from working on the plan. I cannot count on the internet in this village. Sometimes it works well and sometimes very badly. But now that I can't go on organizing small meetings, or with the plans I had in mind with the municipality, I will have to look at the possibilities of doing something online with my project. Everything goes online these days. So why don't I go along with that trend? Watching various documentaries about social media, such as The Social Dilemma, has given me a dilemma about being active on social media. I find it hard to ignore the negative side of it, but using it is the only way to possibly inspire others outside this village. Thanks for the following comparison that someone told me recently. I have decided to put my dilemma aside for now and just go for it. This is the comparison she made. Social media is like a poisonous snake. It is very dangerous, but in a controlled way it can also heal. And if I use it in that last way, I might even be able to inspire people in a positive way. So I use social media as a remedy. So very recently I started recording my daily life via my stories on Instagram. I still have to find my way around, so don't be too critical when looking at them. The borders are closed, but the online world has no borders. And despite my unstable internet, I want to try to give presentations online via Zoom meetings and try to accept the inconveniences of an internet connection that could sometimes fail during a presentation. As the days go by, I feel that I really need more exercise, and I decide to take a morning walk every day. We Dutch people can complain as much as we like about the Dutch weather, but I have to say that there are days when I long for the seasons we have in my country. Sometimes it's really hard to get up for a walk because of the heat, and if I don't get up early enough, it's already too late. The sun is burning you off the street. So it's only possible if I leave around 7 o'clock, or if it's cloudy. And to mention just one more thing, it is so humid here that if you are not careful, your clothes will be moldy. I have to regularly clean my van with apple cider vinegar to keep mold out. And don't forget the mosquitoes and weird little creatures that sting you all day long and from which you have to hope that it's not a dengue mosquito. And to continue with this moan, there are also evenings here when the flying ants appear. They are small creatures, but I must say that the large numbers they swarm around on such evenings give me serious shivers. If I want to get out of my van on a night like that, and my flip-flops are on the ground outside, I then have to take a strategically planned step so that my foot does not land exactly on a flying, and in that case stinging, ant. My biggest fear before I entered the Amazon was the animals I would encounter. I'm well on the way to overcome these fears. One evening I'm confronted with a large tarantula in the middle of my kitchen. I decide to do it differently this time. The last time I found a tarantula and told my neighbor about it, she immediately beat it to death with a wooden stick. They don't seem to be so dangerous if you just leave them alone, but I would never have thought that I could live with a tarantula without stressing out. I think I will feel slightly different if I would suddenly come across a snake in the middle of my kitchen. That chance is quite high if I am to believe my neighbor, who has already told me several stories about snakes in and around the carport I am parked under. You understand that I always cook with a certain degree of alertness. So, that was a summary of the things and animals that are not so nice here. I hope it helps you to appreciate again the weather and innocent insects in your country, if that's the case for you. One morning, I'm doing my daily morning walk, and I see a whole bunch of migrants standing around two men on the bridge. I make a short video, because I try to record some things here for the moment that I might want to document them. The two men approached me almost immediately. They asked me if I'm a journalist, and I say no. I'm just having my morning walk. When they ask me briefly where I'm from and find out that I'm also like the migrants on the bridge, waiting to cross the border, but then towards Brazil, one of the men says that he is a pro bono lawyer for migrants and he offers me his help. He says, "Wait here for 10 minutes, then we can talk." I sit down on the bridge and wait for him to finish. In the meantime, some migrants come up to me to ask me questions, and I take advantage of the situation to start a conversation with them. Many of them said that despite the job they had in Brazil, they had decided to go to America, to follow the American dream. Corona time or not. Crossing the borders legally or illegally would not make any difference for them anyway. Still, it is difficult to say whether these are their real stories or not. So, like I said before, I try to adopt an observant attitude towards this situation and do not judge it too quickly. After a good conversation that evening with the pro bono lawyer, he offers me his help. He says that I have a good chance of getting out of this situation. I sent him all the necessary documents and now I will have to wait. After these two men, who had come to Assis especially to resolve the situation of the people occupying the bridge, these people broke off their camp and moved to the village of Assis, where they are received in the schools. The occupation of the bridge was initially a problem because the trucks that during the pandemic had permission to transport food supplies between Peru and Brazil could not pass anymore. As a result of this situation, a lot of food was wasted. Now that the bridge is free again, it appears that the occupation of the bridge was not only an untenable situation for the trucks transporting food, but it was also very dangerous. This was because some of the trucks were transporting dynamite, which is used for gold mining in Peru. These trucks had been parked for weeks under the blazing sun, and there was a chance that these trucks could explode, which could have meant that we would not have been here anymore. In short, the release of the bridge caused great relief. Fortunately, we did not hear about this dynamite story until afterwards. It was too dangerous to make this problem public, because if someone had wished to cause harm, it was easy to cause a disaster with this knowledge. In spite of the fact that my neighbors have all had corona before, even the now 99 years old neighbor, and that they all recovered well, they are unfortunately sick for the second time. The old neighbor, after 2 days of hospitalization, is singing again in his rocking chair, and the rest of his family members are also recovering. They are lucky. Where others have had to learn to be alone during this corona period, I have had to learn to indicate my privacy boundaries in situations where I'm always a guest at a place. I can tell you that sometimes that is a difficult situation to find yourself in. For example, here in Assis, I noticed that the carport I'm parked under, which as I told you has been transformed into a living kitchen, is very popular with my neighbors. They see it as a kind of meeting place where you can come in any time of the day. You might say that this is rather fun. But I notice that I value my privacy quite a bit and find it difficult to find a balance between setting boundaries and being friendly. People here don't seem to understand my subtle hints to leave me alone. Despite my fear that this might come across as unpleasant, I decide to place some fabrics as if they are walls to make my kitchen a bit of a room. And this actually has a great effect. So as you can see, the solution is not always to be found in subtle hints, but in clearly visible actions. And the neighbors are just as nice to me as they were before my visible cry for privacy. I've also discovered that I can work, sing and dance undisturbed in the annex of the church, and I've been making good use of this recently. Because it is sometimes difficult not to know when I can leave this village, I have set a date together with Samira and Israel, just because it's possible. We put the date 18th of April on a piece of paper with our signatures, the date we leave. Will this work? No idea. Do I believe in it? Yes. Now let's see what will happen on that day. This was the last episode of the series Nomanslands. So as I wrote, I have now started on a vlog on my Instagram and Facebook channel. If you are curious about what my daily life is like here, go to the highlight called vlog on Instagram, and there you can watch the videos I've made since I started vlogging. You can also subscribe to my newsletter so that you can see the photos with these podcast stories. You can do this by going to my website ecobusamerica.com and clicking on the news page. The photos that go with this podcast are being found under news podcast number 19. Thanks for listening.